Ethan's penthouse overlooked Manhattan, a place filled with energy, life, and promise. But to Ethan, it was a canvas of loneliness. Every morning, he would wake up to the piercing sound of an alarm at precisely 6 a.m. His mornings were mechanical. He'd sit on the edge of his bed, face buried in his hands for a moment, then rise. The same monotonous routine would follow, brushing his teeth, shaving the gray stubble from his jawline, and dressing in a dark, custom-tailored suit. He no longer admired his reflection. The mirror was just a reminder of what he had lost and the years that had passed since then. The weight of his memories never faded. They settled on his shoulders like a heavy coat. 25 years had passed since that dreadful night, the night he lost her. His wife, Sarah, the only person who ever truly understood him, had died in a car accident. Since then, guilt and pain had been his silent companions. Ethan's wealth was immense. He owned businesses that stretched from Wall Street to Hong Kong, but no amount of money could fill the emptiness inside him. As the head of Knox Enterprises, he led a company of thousands, yet he felt more alone than ever. His staff called him the Ice King behind his back. No one dared to confront his cold demeanor. It was true. Ethan was detached, distant, and wrapped in an invisible armor. On most days, his schedule was relentless. Meetings, boardrooms, signing documents. Each task was executed with robotic precision. But as the sun dipped and dusk crept over the city, his resolve would weaken. Ethan had a habit of visiting the same bar every Friday night. It was dimly lit and nestled in a quiet corner of the Upper East Side, far from the chaos of his corporate world. There, he would sit alone, nursing a glass of whiskey, staring into its amber depths as if searching for answers. He never spoke to anyone, never entertained company. Tonight was no different. He sat in his usual corner, his face obscured by shadows, lost in thought. As he glanced out of the window, he noticed the falling rain, droplets tapping insistently against the glass. For a brief moment, memories of Sarah's laughter on a rainy day flooded his mind. It was a sharp, sudden ache, one he could never get used to. Ethan knew why he couldn't let go. It was because he blamed himself. He was the one driving that night, and he had survived while she hadn't. This cruel irony gnawed at him, an unbearable truth that haunted his nights and clouded his days. He had built walls around his heart, impenetrable and high, believing it was safer that way. Back in his penthouse, Ethan found himself standing by the large window that overlooked Central Park. The city lights flickered like a sea of distant stars, but they did little to lift his spirits. He reached for a photograph on the mantel. It was the only one he kept, a picture of Sarah taken on their wedding day. Her smile was radiant, full of life and love. He whispered softly, "I'm sorry, Sarah. I'm so sorry." The city outside moved on relentlessly, but Ethan remained stuck in a moment that had passed 25 years ago. It was a life without color, joy, or purpose, only a haunting silence that enveloped him each night. And as he lay in his vast, empty bed, the darkness seemed to speak to him, reminding him that no matter how powerful he was, he could not undo the past. This was Ethan's reality, a cycle of wealth and power devoid of meaning, a life defined by a single tragic moment. And deep down, buried under layers of denial, was a desperate need for redemption, one that he did not yet know how to seek. Ethan's limousine weaved through the crowded streets of Manhattan. It was late afternoon, and the weather had shifted dramatically. The once overcast sky had given way to a bleak downpour, painting the city in shades of gray. He wasn't in the back seat of the limousine by choice. There was a meeting he needed to attend, one of those unavoidable obligations. Ethan's gaze was fixed outside the window, the raindrops streaking down like silent tears, mirroring the sadness within him. As the car approached an intersection in the Lower East Side, the driver slowed down, allowing Ethan a view of the wet, bustling sidewalks. It was then that something unusual caught his eye. A young woman, shivering in the rain, holding a crying baby tightly to her chest. She was sitting on a piece of cardboard, soaked through, her eyes darting around anxiously as if searching for help. Her face was pale, her clothes threadbare, and the baby in her arms was wrapped in a tattered blanket. Ethan's initial impulse was to look away. His life was filled with calculated decisions, void of spontaneous acts of compassion. But something held him. Something about her desperation resonated deeply within him. He leaned forward and tapped on the glass separating him from the driver. "Stop here," he commanded. The driver, surprised by the sudden change of plans, pulled over. Ethan opened the door himself, feeling the cold rain hit his face as he stepped out. It was a scene both foreign and unsettling to him. Getting out of his car in the middle of the street, without a precise reason, except for a strange, inexplicable urge. The young woman noticed Ethan approaching and instinctively recoiled, clutching the baby tighter. "I'm not going to hurt you," Ethan said, his voice uncharacteristically soft, though still bearing the traces of authority. Her eyes, wide with fear and distrust, locked onto his. "Please," she said in a trembling voice, "I just need a little money to buy some food for my baby." Her words were barely audible, drowned out by the sound of the rain and passing traffic. Ethan, unsure of what he was doing or why, reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his wallet. He fumbled slightly, not used to such direct encounters, and handed her several bills. It was more than enough to buy food, and the gesture was surprisingly generous for someone as guarded as Ethan. The woman's face was a mix of relief and confusion. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. The baby, sensing the tension lifting, stopped crying and looked up at Ethan with wide, innocent eyes. Ethan nodded, unsure of what to say. It was an awkward moment, two worlds colliding, neither fully understanding the other. The young woman, still holding the baby close, spoke again. "Why are you helping me?" Ethan paused, caught off guard by the question. He didn't have an answer that made sense, not even to himself. "I don't know," he finally admitted, his voice almost lost in the rain. Before he could dwell on the strangeness of his own actions, he turned away abruptly, heading back to the limousine. As he climbed back inside, he felt a peculiar mix of emotions, something between guilt and a flicker of forgotten humanity. The driver, having witnessed the entire scene through the rearview mirror, waited for Ethan's instructions. "Let's go," Ethan said quietly, his eyes still lingering on the rearview mirror, catching one last glimpse of the woman as the car pulled away. She was holding the money, staring after him with an expression of gratitude and confusion. The baby nestled closer to her, seemingly soothed for the first time that day. As the car sped towards its original destination, Ethan found himself lost in thought. He couldn't explain why he had stopped, nor why he felt an odd sense of calm afterward. Maybe it was the brief connection, or maybe it was the look in the young woman's eyes, a look of desperate hope he hadn't seen in years. The meeting that followed was as mundane as Ethan had anticipated. More discussions about mergers and acquisitions, profit margins, and market expansions. Yet, for the first time in years, his mind wasn't fully present in the boardroom. The image of the young woman and her baby lingered, intruding on his thoughts like an unwanted guest. When he returned to his penthouse later that night, Ethan felt a strange emptiness. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, hoping it would bring the usual numbness, but it didn't work this time. The memory of the young mother's face kept flashing before him. He sat down, his glass untouched, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a small, almost imperceptible crack in the icy armor that had defined him for so long. As he finally lay down to sleep, Ethan whispered to himself, "Why did I do it?" But no answer came, just a lingering feeling that perhaps, somewhere within the layers of guilt and pain, he had found a glimpse of the man he once was, or could still be. The next morning dawned gray and bleak, echoing the heaviness in Ethan's chest. It was October 17th, a date etched into his memory. For the past 25 years, Ethan had spent this day visiting the cemetery where his wife, Sarah, was buried. It had become a ritual, a solemn act of atonement that he couldn't abandon, no matter how much it hurt. Dressed in his usual black suit, Ethan drove alone this time. No driver, no limousine. He wanted to feel the cold steering wheel in his hands, the rough pavement beneath the tires. The journey was silent, just like his thoughts, broken only by the rhythmic wipers struggling against the morning drizzle. As he approached the cemetery's entrance, a familiar wave of dread washed over him, but he knew he couldn't turn back. The cemetery was eerily quiet, with only a few visitors scattered among the rows of gravestones. Ethan parked his car and stepped out, the sound of wet leaves crunching beneath his polished shoes. The path to Sarah's grave was well worn. He had walked it countless times, but each step felt like the first, heavy with grief. When he reached Sarah's headstone, Ethan stopped. The marble was slightly weathered, but her name was still clearly visible, Sarah Mitchell Cross. The sight of it made his throat tighten. He placed a bouquet of white lilies at the base of the stone, a ritual he never changed. White lilies were her favorite. For a moment, he stood there silently, his hands shoved into his pockets, feeling the biting wind. Then, unexpectedly, a voice interrupted his solitude. "Excuse me." It was soft, hesitant, and came from just a few steps away. Ethan turned and saw a young woman standing next to the adjacent gravestone. Her face looked familiar, but it took him a moment to recognize her. It was the same woman he had helped the day before, the one with the baby in her arms. She wasn't holding the child now. Instead, she clutched a small bouquet of daisies. The coincidence was unsettling, and Ethan found himself momentarily speechless. The woman seemed equally surprised. "It's you," she said, a mix of shock and uncertainty in her voice. "From yesterday." Ethan nodded, feeling a strange sense of déjà vu. "Yes, it's me," he replied, his voice colder than intended. He hadn't expected to see her here of all places. The woman hesitated, then gestured to the gravestone she was standing beside. "This is my mother's grave. I come here whenever I can." Her voice wavered slightly, revealing the rawness of her emotions. Ethan's eyes drifted to the name etched on the stone next to Sarah's. The surname matched, Mitchell. He felt his stomach drop, a sense of dread he hadn't felt in years. "Mitchell?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman nodded. "Grace Mitchell. She died 25 years ago, trying to help someone trapped in a car accident. I never got to meet her. I was only a few months old." There was a pause as she swallowed hard, trying to keep her composure. Ethan felt as though the ground beneath him had shifted. Grace Mitchell, the woman who had tried to save Sarah and him that night. He had heard the name before, back then, but it had faded over the years, buried under layers of guilt and grief. Now, hearing it again, the weight of his past suddenly felt unbearable. "I'm sorry," Ethan said abruptly, though he wasn't sure what he was apologizing for. The accident, the past, or simply for being there. The woman, sensing his discomfort, quickly looked away. I didn't mean to intrude," she stammered, her voice softening. "I just come here to bring flowers sometimes. It's all I can do to feel close to her." Ethan struggled to find words. His mind raced with questions, but none of them seemed appropriate. Instead, he simply nodded, unsure of what to say or how to react. The silence stretched between them, filled with a shared but unspoken pain. After a moment, the woman took a step back. "I should go," she said quietly. "I didn't mean to interrupt your moment," but as she turned to leave, something in Ethan stopped her. "Wait," he called out, surprising even himself with the urgency in his voice. She paused, turning to face him again, her expression a mix of confusion and curiosity. "Your name?" Ethan asked, his voice softer now. "What's your name?" "Lily," she answered. "Lily Mitchell." The name felt like a punch to the gut. Ethan stared at her, the pieces of a puzzle he had tried to forget suddenly falling into place. The woman he had helped was the daughter of the woman who had tried to save him. The realization was overwhelming, and for a moment, Ethan couldn't speak. Lily, sensing his reaction, looked puzzled. "Are you okay?" she asked, concern flickering in her eyes. Ethan nodded slowly, though he wasn't okay. He was far from it. "Yes," he lied, trying to steady his voice. "I'm fine. It's just unexpected, that's all." Lily seemed to accept his response, though her gaze lingered on him, as if searching for something beneath his stoic facade. "Thank you again for yesterday," she said softly. "It meant more than you know." Ethan merely nodded, unable to form a proper response. As Lily turned and walked away, Ethan stood there, staring at the gravestone she had just left. The rain began to fall harder, drenching him, but he barely noticed. He was lost in the echoes of the past, haunted by the unexpected encounter. Ethan remained by Sarah's grave long after Lily had disappeared from sight. His mind was a whirlwind of memories, regrets, and a new, unanticipated guilt. He whispered to the headstone, his voice cracking, "Sarah, what have I done?" And in that moment, for the first time in years, Ethan felt not just the pain of the past but the stirring of something unfamiliar. An unresolved chapter, a connection he had never anticipated. It was the beginning of something he didn't yet understand, but it was there, lingering like a ghost from the life he had tried so hard to forget. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling of that unexpected encounter at the cemetery. Lily Mitchell's face, her words, and the realization of their connection haunted him relentlessly. That night, sleep eluded him. His mind replayed the accident, the rescue attempts, and the details he had tried to forget. He found himself lying awake, staring at the ceiling as fragments of memories crashed over him. Grace's face among the chaos, Sarah's final words, and the silent witness that was Lily, just a baby at the time. The next morning, Ethan sat in his office, his focus blurred. Meetings droned on, and reports piled up on his desk, but his thoughts were distant. He couldn't stop thinking about Lily. What was she doing now? How had she managed all these years without a mother? By afternoon, he made a decision that surprised even himself. He needed to find her again. It wasn't just curiosity. It was a need for answers, a need to understand the connection that had been thrust upon him. With little hesitation, he dialed a number he had rarely used. "I need information," he said curtly, "about someone named Lily Mitchell." Within hours, his contacts came through. Lily was living in a rundown apartment building on the edge of the city, barely making ends meet as a waitress. The details were sparse, but it was enough for Ethan. That evening, he found himself standing outside the entrance of the decrepit building, feeling out of place in his expensive suit and polished shoes. The neighborhood was rough, with graffiti-covered walls and the faint smell of smoke lingering in the air. He hesitated before entering, wondering if he was making a mistake. But the need to understand, to connect the dots, was too strong. Ethan climbed the creaking stairs, each step echoing in the narrow hallway. When he reached her door, marked by peeling paint and a broken doorbell, he paused. For a moment, he considered turning back, but he raised his hand and knocked firmly. The door creaked open after a few seconds. Lily stood there, looking surprised and wary. She was dressed in worn clothes, her hair pulled back messily, and there were dark circles under her eyes. Ethan felt a pang of guilt, realizing just how different their lives had been. "You," Lily said, her voice filled with confusion. "What are you doing here?" Ethan cleared his throat, unsure how to explain himself. "I needed to see you," he managed, his tone more vulnerable than he intended. "Can I come in?" Lily hesitated, her eyes filled with suspicion. "Why would you want to come here?" "We barely know each other." "I know," Ethan admitted, "but I think we have more in common than you realize." Something in his voice must have convinced her, because she stepped aside reluctantly, allowing him to enter. The apartment was small and sparsely furnished. A few toys were scattered on the floor, and there was a faint smell of baby formula in the air. It was clear that life had not been kind to Lily, and the sight of it all made Ethan feel a deep, inexplicable shame. Lily motioned for him to sit, and Ethan took a seat on the worn-out couch. The baby, now awake, cooed softly from a makeshift crib in the corner of the room. Lily picked him up, cradling him gently as she sat down across from Ethan. "So," she began, her tone guarded, "why are you really here?" Ethan took a deep breath, unsure of how to begin. "Lily, I found out who your mother was. I was there the night she died." Lily's eyes widened, her grip tightening around the baby. "What are you talking about?" "I was in the accident," Ethan confessed. "The one that killed your mother. It was my car she was trying to save someone from." The silence that followed was deafening. Lily stared at Ethan, her expression a mix of shock, anger, and something else, perhaps understanding, or maybe just confusion. "Why are you telling me this now?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "Why after all these years?" "I don't know," Ethan admitted, feeling a wave of helplessness wash over him. Maybe it's because I never got the chance to thank her. Maybe it's because I see how much she's affected your life, and I need to make things right, somehow. Lily's eyes were filled with unshed tears, and Ethan could see the struggle within her. You can't change the past, she said, her voice cracking. Nothing can bring her back. I know that, Ethan replied softly, but I can try to help you now. I owe her that much at least. Lily's shoulders slumped, the weight of her grief and exhaustion finally visible. Help? She asked bitterly. What could you possibly do to help me? My life has been a series of struggles. I grew up in an orphanage, bounced from one foster home to another. And now, I'm just trying to survive for my son. Ethan felt a surge of emotion, a mix of regret and responsibility. I'm sorry, he said, the words heavy with sincerity. I know I can't fix what's been broken, but I want to try. I can provide for you and your son, give you a better chance at life. It's not charity, it's a debt I owe. Lily looked at him, her expression unreadable. You think money can solve everything? She asked quietly. No, Ethan replied, but it's all I have to offer right now. And it might make things a little easier for you. The baby, sensing the tension, began to fuss. Lily rocked him gently, trying to calm him down. I don't know if I can trust you, she admitted, her voice barely audible. Ethan nodded, understanding her hesitation. I don't expect you to trust me right away, he said, but I hope you'll give me a chance to make things right, even if it's just a small part of it. Lily looked at him for a long moment, as if trying to gauge the sincerity in his eyes. Finally, she sighed, a sound filled with exhaustion and reluctant hope. We'll see, she said simply, but I'm not making any promises. Ethan felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't forgiveness, and it certainly wasn't redemption, but it was a start. As he stood to leave, he turned to Lily one last time. Thank you, he said, for listening. Lily nodded, her expression softening just slightly. Just don't expect too much, she warned. I've learned not to hope for things I can't control. Ethan left the apartment, stepping back into the cold night air. His heart felt heavy, but there was also a faint glimmer of something new, a sense of purpose, perhaps. The journey toward redemption was only beginning, and it was unclear where it would lead. But for the first time in years, Ethan felt as though he was finally moving forward. The following weeks brought a mix of awkward attempts and hesitant gestures as Ethan tried to offer genuine help to Lily. He had arranged for a steady supply of groceries to be delivered to her door and had paid the overdue rent on her apartment. But the barrier between them remained palpable. Lily accepted the help, but always with a hint of skepticism, her eyes often clouded with unresolved anger and distrust. Ethan could sense it, an emotional distance that matched his own guilt. One cold evening, Ethan decided to visit Lily unannounced. It was raining again, the kind of relentless downpour that seemed to mirror the tension in the air. He had thought carefully about this visit, aware that his presence could be more unsettling than reassuring. As he approached her building, he noticed the usual sense of unease creeping up on him. He had never been good at this, being vulnerable, honest, or personal. He knocked gently, and Lily opened the door a moment later, looking tired and surprised to see him. Ethan, she said, a hint of irritation in her voice. What are you doing here? I wanted to check on you, Ethan replied awkwardly, feeling strangely out of place in the small apartment. Is this a bad time? Lily hesitated, but stepped aside to let him in. The baby, now crawling, was busy exploring the room, his soft giggles filling the air. Ethan watched him with a mix of warmth and a pang of regret. The child was a reminder of innocence, of a new beginning that Ethan himself had never been able to fully embrace. His name is Max, Lily said suddenly, noticing Ethan's gaze. Her voice was softer now, less guarded. He's all I have. Ethan nodded slowly. He's beautiful, he said, and the words felt genuine, surprising even him. Lily sat down at the small kitchen table, motioning for Ethan to do the same. Look, she began, her tone a mixture of frustration and fatigue. I appreciate what you're doing, but I can't just forget everything that happened. My mother died saving you, and I grew up without her. That's not something that can be fixed with money or charity. Ethan felt the sting of her words, but he also knew they were true. "I don't expect you to forget," he admitted, his voice low. "And I know I can't undo what happened, but I want to help, not out of pity or guilt, but because I owe it to you and to your mother." Lily's eyes flashed with a mix of anger and something else, perhaps a flicker of longing. "Do you even know what it's like?" she asked quietly. "To grow up feeling like you were someone's last act of kindness? Like your entire existence is just a reminder of what someone lost?" Ethan was silent for a moment, the weight of her words pressing down on him. "No," he finally said. "I don't know what that's like. But I do know what it feels like to be haunted by the past, to carry the weight of someone's death and never be able to make peace with it." Lily's expression softened slightly, but her eyes were still filled with guarded skepticism. "Then why did you survive?" she asked bluntly. "Why did my mother die trying to save you?" Ethan had asked himself that same question for years, and he still didn't have an answer. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice cracking. "I've asked myself that 1,000 times. Maybe it was just a cruel twist of fate, or maybe there's a reason I survived. I'm not sure. But I know I can't waste the chance I was given." Lily looked down, her face drawn with pain. "I grew up in foster homes," she said quietly, as if sharing a secret she had kept for too long. "Most of them weren't kind. I had to learn to fight for everything: food, clothes, even safety. And when Max came along, I had to fight even harder." Ethan listened, his heart heavy with a mix of empathy and guilt. "I wish I had known," he said, the words feeling inadequate. "I wish I could have helped sooner." Lily shook her head, a bitter smile playing on her lips. "People like you don't notice people like me," she said matter-of-factly. "I was just another face in the crowd, trying to survive." Ethan leaned forward, his voice filled with urgency. "But I notice you now, and I want to help, not because I feel guilty, but because it's the right thing to do." Lily seemed to consider his words for a moment, her eyes filled with a mix of emotions. "You say that now," she said slowly. "But what happens when you get bored, when the guilt isn't enough anymore?" Ethan met her gaze, his expression earnest. "I won't get bored, Lily," he promised. "I'm not here for a quick fix or a temporary distraction. I'm here because I owe it to you, to your mother, and to myself." The room was silent for a moment, the only sound being Max's soft babbling as he played on the floor. Then, Lily spoke again, her voice softer, almost vulnerable. "I want to believe you," she said quietly, "but I don't know if I can. I've been let down too many times." Ethan nodded, understanding her hesitation. "I know," he said, "but I'm not asking you to believe me right away. Just let me try. Let me be a part of your life, even if it's just a small part." Lily's eyes were filled with unshed tears, and for the first time, she seemed to allow herself to feel the hope she had been resisting. "Maybe," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "maybe I can let you try." Ethan felt a surge of relief, mixed with a deeper sense of responsibility. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a step, a chance to make things right, one small action at a time. As Ethan left the apartment that evening, the rain had subsided, leaving a damp stillness in the air. He felt a strange mixture of sadness and hope, as if he were standing at the edge of something new, uncertain but necessary. The journey toward redemption was far from over, but tonight, he had taken another step. A step that felt more significant than any deal he had ever closed or victory he had achieved. In the dim light of the street, Ethan paused and looked back at the building, the faint glow of Lily's window visible above. This time, he whispered to himself, "I won't walk away." But as he turned to leave, a familiar sense of foreboding settled over him. He knew that facing the ghosts of his past wouldn't be easy, and that there were more secrets to uncover. Secrets that could either break him or finally set him free. The days that followed were filled with a cautious dance between Ethan and Lily, neither fully trusting the other, yet both slowly accepting the fragile bond forming between them. Ethan kept his promise to help without pushing too hard. He arranged for Max to see a pediatrician, enrolled him in a nearby daycare, and found part-time work for Lily at one of his companies. It wasn't a glamorous position, but it was enough to give her stability and a sense of independence. At first, Lily was reluctant to accept the job offer, suspecting that it came with hidden strings. "I don't want charity," she had said bluntly, her voice tinged with defiance. "It's not charity," Ethan assured her. "It's an opportunity. You'll be earning it, just like everyone else." Reluctantly, Lily agreed. Her days became busier, filled with the routine of work, daycare pickups, and caring for Max. Though the workload was exhausting, Lily felt a sense of purpose that she hadn't felt in years. And Ethan, for the first time in decades, found a semblance of warmth creeping into his cold existence. Despite their efforts to create a semblance of normalcy, the past loomed large. The unresolved tragedy that connected them was an ever-present shadow, felt but rarely spoken of. One evening, Ethan invited Lily and Max to dinner at his penthouse. It was an awkward suggestion, one that Ethan himself was unsure about, but he felt the need to bridge the distance that still lingered. Lily, initially hesitant, agreed, sensing that perhaps it was time to confront the past head-on, rather than let it simmer silently. She dressed simply, and when she arrived at the penthouse, she seemed out of place among the opulence. Max, however, was thrilled by the spaciousness, toddling around with wide eyes, laughing as he explored the unfamiliar surroundings. The dinner was a mix of tension and small moments of unexpected connection. Ethan, not used to casual conversations, struggled to make small talk. "How's work?" he asked awkwardly, trying to sound interested. "It's fine," Lily replied, her tone neutral. "Better than what I had before, at least." Ethan nodded, unsure of how to keep the conversation going. "Max seems happy," he observed, watching the little boy attempt to climb onto one of the plush chairs. "He is," Lily said, a soft smile breaking through. "He's never had this much space to run around." It was a simple moment, but one that hinted at the possibility of healing, however tentative. Ethan, noticing the brief smile on Lily's face, felt a flicker of hope. But just as quickly, the mood shifted. "I still don't understand," Lily suddenly said, her voice breaking the fragile peace. "Why did you survive that night, and she didn't?" The question hit Ethan like a punch, raw and unexpected. He had been trying to avoid this exact confrontation, hoping that time and actions would ease the burden of the truth. But Lily's eyes were fixed on him, demanding an answer that had haunted them both for too long. "I don't know," Ethan admitted, his voice heavy. "I was driving too fast, trying to get away from an argument we'd had. Sarah wanted me to slow down, but I didn't listen. The crash happened so fast, and then Grace appeared, trying to help us. I never got to thank her. I never even knew who she was until recently." Lily's face was a mixture of anger and sorrow. "So, it was an argument that caused it?" she asked, her voice shaking. Ethan nodded slowly, his eyes filled with regret. "Yes, and it's haunted me ever since. I should have done things differently. I should have saved her. But I didn't." Tears welled up in Lily's eyes, and she wiped them away quickly, trying to maintain her composure. "She died trying to save you," she said quietly. "She lost her life because of a mistake you made." "I know," Ethan said, his voice barely audible, "and I can never make up for that. But I want to try to make things better, even if it's just a little." Lily looked away, her shoulders slumping with the weight of years of unspoken pain. "I grew up thinking she was a hero," she confessed. "The nuns at the orphanage always said she died doing something noble. I clung to that story, even when things got hard. But now, hearing all this, it's hard to accept." Ethan felt a deep, raw ache in his chest. "She was a hero, Lily," he said earnestly. "She didn't know who I was, or who Sarah was, but she risked everything to help us. That's something you should never doubt." Lily seemed to absorb his words, her expression softening slightly. "I just don't know if I can forgive you," she said after a moment, her voice low. "Or if I even want to." Ethan nodded, accepting her words. "I understand," he said, "and I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just asking for the chance to make things right, even if it's in small ways." The tension in the room was palpable, but beneath it, there was a sense of catharsis. It wasn't a resolution, not by a long shot, but it was a start, a painful, honest step forward. Max, sensing the heavy atmosphere, reached for Lily's hand, his small fingers tugging gently at her sleeve. Lily picked him up, holding him close as if seeking comfort in his innocent presence. "I need time," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need time to process all of this." Ethan nodded again, feeling the weight of her words. "Take all the time you need," he said quietly. "I'll be here." As the evening came to an end, Ethan escorted Lily and Max to the door. Before she left, Lily turned to face him one last time. "I don't know what the future holds," she said honestly, "but thank you for being honest tonight." Ethan's gaze was steady, filled with a mix of regret and hope. "I'm glad we talked," he replied, "and I hope we can keep trying, for Max's sake, if not for ours." Lily nodded slowly, a hint of acceptance in her eyes. "We'll see," she said simply, before stepping into the elevator with Max in her arms. As the doors closed, Ethan stood there, feeling a strange sense of relief mingled with the familiar ache of the past. It was far from over, but tonight had been a necessary confrontation, a chance to begin healing, no matter how difficult. Ethan returned to the empty penthouse, the silence more profound than ever. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, but this time, it didn't taste the same. The old numbness was giving way to something different, a sense of vulnerability, of unfinished business, and of the fragile possibility of redemption. He looked out over the city, the lights twinkling below like distant stars, and whispered into the empty room, "Sarah, I'm trying. I really am." And for the first time in years, he felt a small, hesitant glimmer of hope. The days grew colder as November approached, and the city's hustle intensified with people preparing for the upcoming holidays. For Ethan, the season brought a familiar sense of isolation, but this year, it was punctuated by a sense of restless anticipation. He and Lily had reached a fragile understanding, but it was clear that years of pain and mistrust could not be undone in a matter of weeks. Still, they both seemed determined to keep trying, navigating their new reality with hesitant steps. At work, Ethan maintained his usual demeanor, but those close to him noticed a subtle change. He seemed more attentive, his decisions less cutthroat, and his temper less harsh. It was as if the walls he had built around himself were slowly beginning to crack. He even found himself taking an interest in the small details of Lily's new role at his company, subtly ensuring that she had the support she needed without making it obvious that he was involved. One chilly afternoon, as Ethan was about to leave his office, he received a call from Lily. It was unexpected. She rarely reached out unless it was necessary. "Ethan," she said, her voice tight with anxiety, "Max has a fever. I need to take him to the hospital, but I can't afford a cab right now." Ethan's response was immediate. "I'm coming to get you," he said, grabbing his coat without hesitation. "Stay put. I'll be there in 15 minutes. When he arrived at her building, Lily was standing outside, holding a listless Max in her arms. The toddler's face was flushed, his eyes half closed from exhaustion. Without a word, Ethan opened the car door, and Lily quickly climbed in, cradling Max against her chest. The drive to the hospital was silent except for Max's occasional whimpers. Ethan's heart ached with a feeling he hadn't experienced in years, pure, unfiltered worry. "He'll be okay," he said quietly, though it was as much a reassurance for himself as it was for Lily. At the hospital, they were ushered into a small examination room, and a doctor soon arrived to check Max's condition. Lily's anxiety was palpable as she answered the doctor's questions, her voice strained but calm. Ethan stood nearby, feeling helpless but determined to stay. He couldn't leave, not now. After what felt like an eternity, the doctor returned with a diagnosis. "It's a viral infection," he explained gently. "He'll need fluids, rest, and medication to bring down the fever. He should recover in a few days." Lily let out a sigh of relief, tears welling up in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. Ethan, standing beside her, felt a surge of emotion he couldn't quite name. It was a mix of relief, protectiveness, and a deep, aching regret for not having been there for anyone like this before. He placed a hand on Lily's shoulder, a small gesture of support that she didn't resist. They spent the next few hours in the hospital room, waiting for Max's fever to subside. Ethan sat quietly, watching as Lily tried to comfort the sleeping boy. There was an intimacy to the moment, a shared vulnerability that neither of them acknowledged but both felt. As midnight approached, Lily looked over at Ethan, exhaustion etched across her face. "Why are you still here?" she asked softly. "You don't have to stay." Ethan met her gaze, his expression sincere. "I want to be here," he said simply. "I'm not leaving until I know Max is okay." Lily seemed to absorb his words, her eyes softening just a little. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely audible. It wasn't much, but it was more genuine than anything she had said before. When Max finally stabilized, Ethan drove them back to Lily's apartment. The streets were nearly empty, the city lights casting a soft glow over the wet pavement. Lily cradled a now sleeping Max in her arms, her exhaustion palpable. Ethan's heart was heavy, but also filled with a sense of quiet resolve. He had promised to be there, and for once, he was keeping that promise. As he helped Lily carry Max into the building and up to her apartment, Ethan felt a strange sense of belonging, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. Once inside, he gently laid Max down on the small bed while Lily covered him with a blanket. "Will you be okay?" Ethan asked quietly as he prepared to leave. Lily nodded, though her eyes were filled with a mix of gratitude and vulnerability. "Yes," she said, "I think we will be." Ethan hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "If you need anything, call me. Anytime." Lily managed a tired smile. "I will," she promised. As Ethan stepped out into the chilly night air, he felt a mixture of exhaustion and a strange, unexpected warmth. It was as if, for the first time in a long time, he had done something that mattered, something that wasn't driven by profit, power, or guilt, but by a genuine desire to be there for someone else. But the relief was short-lived. The next morning, as Ethan arrived at his office, he found an envelope waiting for him on his desk. It was unmarked, but inside was a single sheet of paper with a message written in bold, threatening letters. "Stay away from Lily." Ethan's hands trembled as he read the words, a cold wave of dread washing over him. Someone was watching, someone who didn't want him involved in Lily's life. The old, familiar fear crept back, mingled with a new urgency. He had been so focused on trying to help, he hadn't considered the dangers that might come with it. Ethan knew he couldn't let this threat go unanswered. He needed to protect Lily and Max, no matter what it cost him. But he also knew that confronting the darkness of his past was going to be more complicated and more dangerous than he had anticipated. As he sat in his office, the note still clutched in his hand, Ethan felt a surge of determination. He had come too far to turn back now. Whatever lay ahead, he was ready to face it, even if it meant risking everything. Ethan sat at his desk, the threatening note still clutched in his hand. The words, "Stay away from Lily," were etched in bold, menacing strokes, and they seemed to pulse with a sinister energy. His initial shock had turned into anger, a fierce protectiveness he hadn't felt in years. He knew he had to act, but first, he needed to find out who had sent the warning. The first call he made was to a trusted security consultant, someone he had worked with during hostile business takeovers. This time, however, it was personal. "I need surveillance," Ethan instructed, his voice cold and decisive. "I want to know who's been watching me and Lily." The consultant assured him that they'd start immediately, but Ethan felt no relief. The message had unsettled him deeply, not just because of the threat, but because it confirmed that Lily's past might be more complicated than he had anticipated. He couldn't help but wonder if this was related to the accident years ago, or if it was connected to something darker lurking in Lily's life. Later that afternoon, Ethan's phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was Lily. "Ethan, I need to talk to you," she said urgently. "Can you meet me at the park near my apartment? It's about Mac." Ethan's heart raced. "I'll be there in 15 minutes, he replied, grabbing his coat and rushing out the door. When he arrived at the small, run-down playground, he found Lily sitting on a bench, her face drawn and tired. Max was playing quietly in a sandbox nearby, oblivious to the tension between the adults. Ethan approached cautiously, sensing that something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked, taking a seat beside her. Lily's eyes were filled with worry. "I think someone's been following us," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. I've noticed a black car parked near the daycare a few times, and yesterday, I saw the same car outside my building. Ethan's jaw tightened. He had suspected something like this, but hearing Lily confirm it made the situation feel even more urgent. Lily, I need to be honest with you, he said, keeping his voice low. I received a threat this morning, a note telling me to stay away from you. Lily's face went pale, and she clutched her arms tightly across her chest. What does this mean? Who could be behind it? I don't know yet, Ethan admitted, frustration evident in his tone, but I've hired someone to find out. Until we know more, I want you to be extra careful. Don't go anywhere alone, and keep Max close. Lily nodded, though fear was evident in her eyes. Why would someone do this? Why now? Ethan hesitated before answering. I think it's connected to the past, to what happened with your mother. There are things I've tried to forget, but maybe they're catching up with me. Or maybe there's more to your mother's story that we don't know. Lily looked down, her voice barely audible. I never really knew much about her. The nuns at the orphanage told me she was kind, but that's all I have. Just a few stories, nothing concrete. Ethan's heart ached at the thought of Lily growing up with so many unanswered questions. We'll find out the truth, he promised, his voice filled with determination. I won't let anything happen to you or Mac. Lily's eyes met his, and for the first time, there was a hint of vulnerability in her expression. Why are you doing all this, Ethan? Why are you risking so much for us? Ethan paused, his answer both simple and complex. Because I owe it to your mother, and because I care about you and Max. The sincerity in his voice seemed to reach Lily, but it also brought tears to her eyes. She quickly wiped them away, unwilling to fully let down her guard. I want to believe that, she said quietly, but I'm scared, Ethan. I'm scared of what could happen next. Ethan reached out and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. I know, he said, but you're not alone in this. We're in it together, no matter what. They sat in silence for a moment, watching Max play, his innocent laughter a stark contrast to the darkness closing in around them. It was a reminder of what was at stake, and it strengthened Ethan's resolve. Over the next few days, Ethan's security team monitored Lily's building and the daycare. The black car was spotted several times, but the driver remained elusive, never stepping out or approaching Lily directly. It was as if they were taunting Ethan, reminding him that they were always there, watching. One evening, as Ethan was preparing to leave the office, he received a call from his security consultant. We've identified the car, the voice said tersely. It's registered to a man named Victor Morales. Does that name mean anything to you? Ethan's blood ran cold. Victor Morales was a name he hadn't heard in years, but it was linked to one of the darkest chapters of his past. An underworld figure who had been involved in shady dealings and corruption, a man Ethan had once crossed paths with during a hostile takeover. Victor Morales? Ethan repeated, trying to keep his voice steady. I thought he was out of the picture. He's back, the consultant confirmed, and it seems he's taken an interest in Lily. We're still digging into why, but I suggest you be cautious. Morales is dangerous. Ethan ended the call, his mind racing. He hadn't expected this. Morales' involvement changed everything, making it clear that the threat wasn't just about the past. It was personal, calculated, and very real. The next day, Ethan called Lily to meet him at a cafe, hoping to explain the gravity of the situation without alarming her too much. When she arrived, she seemed on edge, her eyes darting around nervously. What's going on? She asked as soon as she sat down. Ethan leaned forward, his voice urgent but calm. The man behind the threats is Victor Morales. He's someone I've dealt with before, and he's not the kind of person who gives up easily. Lily's face paled again. Why would he be interested in me? I don't know yet, Ethan admitted, but I think it's connected to the accident. Your mother might have had some ties to Morales that we never knew about. Lily's voice was filled with disbelief. My mother? Involved with someone like him? It's possible, Ethan said gently. Or it could be about me. My past dealings with Morales might have dragged you into this. Either way, we need to be very careful. Lily's eyes filled with fear, but there was also a spark of determination. I don't want to live in fear, Ethan, she said firmly. I've spent my whole life fighting to survive. I won't let this man take away what little peace I've found. Ethan felt a surge of admiration for Lily's courage, even in the face of such danger. We'll fight this together, he promised. But we have to be smart. I've arranged for more security around your building, and I want you to consider moving somewhere safer until we figure this out. Lily hesitated, but then nodded slowly. Okay, she agreed. But I want answers, Ethan. I need to know the truth about my mother, about you, about everything. Ethan's eyes were filled with a mix of resolve and regret. You'll get the answers, Lily. I promise. As they left the cafe, the city's cold wind whipped around them, but there was a sense of unity between them that hadn't been there before. They were no longer just strangers connected by a tragic past. They were allies in a battle they hadn't chosen but were determined to win. But as they walked side by side, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Victor Morales wasn't a man who backed down easily, and the darkness of the past was closing in faster than he had anticipated. And this time, the stakes were higher than ever. The tension between Ethan and Lily grew palpable in the days that followed their meeting at the cafe. They were bound by a common enemy now, and the stakes were no longer just personal. They were a matter of survival. Ethan's security team had increased their surveillance, but Victor Morales remained elusive, his moves calculated, his motives still shrouded in mystery. Lily had reluctantly agreed to Ethan's plan to move to a safer location, and they had found a small, nondescript apartment in a quieter part of the city. It was far from luxurious, but it offered more security and privacy than her old building. Ethan insisted on moving her himself, determined to keep her and Max under his watchful eye. Are you sure about this? Lily asked as they loaded the last of her belongings into Ethan's car. Her voice held a mix of exhaustion and resignation, the fear of being uprooted once again evident in her eyes. It's the safest option right now, Ethan replied firmly. Morales is unpredictable. We can't take any chances. As they drove to the new apartment, Ethan kept glancing at Lily in the rearview mirror. She was quiet, staring out the window with Max nestled against her. The toddler was oblivious to the danger, his innocent face a stark contrast to the gravity of the situation. Ethan felt a surge of determination. He would not let Morales harm them, no matter what. Once they arrived, Ethan helped Lily settle in, setting up Max's crib and arranging the few pieces of furniture they had brought along. It felt oddly domestic, an unexpected moment of normalcy in the midst of chaos. But Ethan couldn't shake the sense of impending danger, a feeling that had settled deep in his gut. I know this isn't easy, Ethan said as he finished setting up a small table in the cramped living room. But it's just temporary. As soon as we get more information about Morales' plans, we'll figure out the next step. Lily looked up, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and weariness. You've done more than I ever expected, she admitted quietly. But I still don't understand why Morales would target me now. What does he really want? Ethan hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. Morales is a man who holds grudges, he said carefully. He's ruthless, and he never forgets a debt, real or imagined. I've crossed paths with him before, and I think he sees you as leverage. Leverage? Lily repeated, her brow furrowing. For what? Ethan's jaw tightened. To get to me, he admitted, or to settle old scores related to your mother. Either way, it's dangerous. But I promise you, I won't let him hurt you or Mac. Lily's expression softened, but there was a lingering uncertainty in her eyes. I want to believe you, Ethan, she said, but it's hard. I've lived my whole life expecting the worst. Ethan stepped closer, his voice filled with quiet resolve. This time, you don't have to face it alone. Lily's eyes met his, and for a brief moment, the vulnerability between them was undeniable. But before either of them could say more, Ethan's phone buzzed in his pocket. He answered quickly, his tone shifting to businesslike urgency. What is it? It's Morales, came the voice of Ethan's security consultant. We've got intel suggesting he's planning to confront you directly. He's been seen near your building. Ethan's grip tightened around the phone. I understand. Keep tracking him. I'll handle this. After ending the call, Ethan turned to Lily, his expression grave. I need to go, he said. Morales is making a move. Lily's eyes widened. Ethan, Be careful, she urged, her voice filled with a mix of fear and something else, something almost like concern. Ethan gave a brief nod. I will. Just stay here, lock the doors, and don't open them for anyone but me. As Ethan left the apartment, the cold wind of the evening hit him like a slap. He knew that the confrontation with Morales was inevitable, and he was ready for it. He drove back to his penthouse, his mind focused and clear, each turn of the wheel bringing him closer to a showdown that had been years in the making. When he arrived, the building was eerily quiet. Ethan stepped into the lobby, his senses on high alert. As he approached the private elevator to his penthouse, he felt a presence behind him. Instinctively, he turned, and there stood Victor Morales. Morales was a tall, imposing figure, with dark eyes that held a cold, calculating stare. He smiled, a cruel twist of the lips that held no warmth. Ethan Cross, he said, his voice dripping with mockery. I was wondering when you'd show up. Ethan's gaze was steady, but his muscles tensed, ready for whatever was about to unfold. What do you want, Morales? He demanded. Why are you targeting Lily? Morales's smile widened, his eyes glinting with malice. Lily? He repeated, feigning innocence. I'm not after her. I'm after you. She's just a convenient way to get your attention. Consider it gotten, Ethan replied coldly. But this ends now. Morales stepped closer, his voice lowering to a menacing whisper. You took something from me years ago, Ethan. A deal that cost me everything. And then your wife, Sarah. She was just another casualty of your recklessness. You left a trail of destruction, and now it's time for you to pay. Ethan's jaw tightened, his eyes blazing with a mix of anger and remorse. Sarah's death was an accident, he said, his voice rough with emotion. But you've been using Lily as a pawn. That ends tonight. Morales laughed, a harsh, hollow sound. You think you can protect her? You think you can make up for what happened all those years ago? Yes, Ethan said simply, his voice filled with a calm certainty. I can. The next few moments were a blur of movement. Morales lunged, but Ethan was prepared. The two men grappled, exchanging fierce blows, each one fueled by years of resentment and unresolved hatred. Ethan's training from years of dealing with high-risk negotiations and hostile takeovers had taught him more than just business tactics. It had taught him how to survive. Morales was strong, but Ethan fought with a desperation that was fueled by more than just self-preservation. He was fighting for Lily, for Max, for a chance at redemption. The fight was brutal, each punch landing with a sickening thud. But Ethan refused to back down, his resolve unyielding. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Ethan managed to gain the upper hand, pinning Morales to the ground. This is over, he said, his voice raw but resolute. Stay away from Lily. If you come near her or Max again, I will end this for good. Morales sneered, his face twisted with rage. You think you can just walk away from this? There's more at play than you realize, Ethan. Ethan's grip tightened, his eyes blazing. I don't care what's at play. I care about keeping them safe. As the police arrived, called by Ethan's security team, Morales was taken into custody. Ethan watched as he was led away, his face a mask of defiance. It wasn't a victory, but it was a start. Ethan returned to the new apartment, his body aching and his clothes disheveled. Lily opened the door, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and relief. What happened? She asked, her voice trembling. It's over, Ethan said simply. Morales is in custody. You're safe now. Lily's eyes filled with tears, but this time, they were tears of relief. She stepped forward, surprising Ethan by wrapping her arms around him in a hesitant embrace. Thank you, she whispered. Ethan held her close, feeling a deep, raw emotion that he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. I promised you, Lily, he said softly, and I meant it. But even as they stood there, in the quiet aftermath of the chaos, Ethan knew that this wasn't the end. There were still secrets to uncover, still truths that needed to be faced. And the hardest part was yet to come, finding a way to build a future out of the broken pieces of their pasts. The days that followed Morales' arrest brought a strange mix of relief and lingering unease. For the first time in weeks, Lily and Max could leave the apartment without constantly looking over their shoulders. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but the shadows of the past still lingered. Ethan, too, felt a sense of victory, but it was tempered by the realization that the fight was far from over. Morales might be behind bars, but his words during their confrontation echoed in Ethan's mind. There's more at play than you realize. Ethan knew there were still questions unanswered, secrets about Grace Mitchell's past and her connection to Morales that needed to be uncovered. One evening, Lily invited Ethan over for dinner. It was a simple gesture, but it held significant weight, a sign that she was beginning to trust him, if only a little. Max was his usual cheerful self, running around the small living room with newfound energy. Ethan watched as Lily prepared dinner, her movements more relaxed than they had been in weeks. "It's not much," she said, placing a modest meal of pasta and salad on the table. "But it's a thank you for everything you've done." Ethan smiled, feeling a warmth he hadn't experienced in a long time. "This is more than enough," he assured her. They ate quietly, the sound of Max's laughter occasionally breaking the silence. It was a simple moment, filled with a sense of normalcy that had been absent from both their lives. As they finished eating, Ethan felt a sudden urge to be completely honest with Lily, to lay everything on the table. "There's something you need to know," he said suddenly, setting down his fork. "About your mother." "About that night?" Lily's face tightened, a mixture of curiosity and dread crossing her features. "What is it?" she asked, her voice cautious. Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the truth pressing down on him. "I've been doing some digging into your mother's past, trying to understand why Morales was involved. I found out that Grace Mitchell wasn't just a bystander that night. She was investigating me. She was a journalist, working on a story about corruption in my company. That's why she was there." Lily's eyes widened, a mix of shock and betrayal flashing across her face. "Are you saying my mother was after you? That she was trying to expose you?" "Yes," Ethan admitted, his voice filled with regret. "She was gathering evidence against me. But that doesn't change the fact that she tried to save us. She put her own life at risk to help, even though I was the one she was investigating." Lily's hands trembled, and she looked down, her mind clearly reeling from the revelation. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "All this time, I thought she was just in the wrong place at the wrong time." Ethan leaned forward, his voice urgent but gentle. "Lily, your mother was brave. She was trying to do the right thing. But that doesn't mean I don't bear responsibility for what happened that night. I should have been a better man, and maybe then things would have turned out differently." Tears filled Lily's eyes, and she quickly wiped them away. "I grew up believing in her goodness," she said quietly. "I held on to that to survive. Now, knowing that she was investigating you, it makes it all so complicated." Ethan reached across the table, taking her hand gently. "I know," he said, "and I'm sorry. I can't change the past, but I can try to make up for it now, however I can." Lily's expression softened, and for the first time, she didn't pull away from his touch. "You already have," she said, her voice filled with a mix of sadness and acceptance. "Maybe that's enough." As the evening wore on, they sat together in the small living room, watching Max play with a worn-out toy car. There was a sense of peace, however fragile, that settled over the room. It was as if, in the midst of all the chaos, they had found a small haven, a place where the past could be acknowledged without completely defining the present. A few days later, Ethan received a call from his lawyer. "Ethan, there's been a development," the voice said urgently. "Morales has agreed to talk. He claims to have information about Grace Mitchell's investigation." Ethan's heart raced as he made his way to the prison where Morales was being held. When he finally sat across from the man who had threatened everything he held dear, he was prepared for answers. Morales's eyes were cold, but there was a hint of weariness in his voice. "You came," he said with a smirk. "I knew you would." "Talk," Ethan demanded, keeping his composure. "What do you know about Grace?" Morales leaned back, as if savoring the moment. "Grace Mitchell was one of the best journalists I ever met," he said. "She was fearless, willing to do whatever it took to uncover the truth. But she got too close. She found out about deals I had with your company, corruption, money laundering. She was going to expose us both. Ethan's stomach churned. And you let her die, he said, his voice low. Morales' expression remained indifferent. I didn't kill her, he said simply. She made her choice that night. But I wasn't going to stop her from risking her life for someone like you. Ethan's anger simmered beneath the surface, but he forced himself to remain calm. What do you want? He asked. Leverage, Morales replied smoothly. You have connections, Ethan. I could use a favor or two. Ethan's eyes were cold. You think I'd help you after everything you've done? Morales shrugged. You're not helping me. You're helping yourself. Or rather, helping Lily and Max think about it. Ethan stood abruptly, unable to stomach another minute in Morales' presence. This ends here, he said, his voice filled with finality. You've already done enough damage. As he walked away, Morales' words lingered in his mind. The truth about Grace's investigation was a bitter pill to swallow, but it also brought clarity. Ethan realized that his quest for redemption wasn't just about making amends for the past. It was about finding a way to live with the choices he had made. Back at the apartment, Ethan found Lily sitting by the window, watching Max play with a new set of building blocks. Her eyes were distant, as if she were lost in thought. I went to see Morales, Ethan said quietly, taking a seat beside her. He confirmed everything. Your mother was trying to expose the corruption in my company, but she still chose to save me that night. Lily looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and understanding. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand why she did what she did, she said softly. But maybe that's not the point. Ethan nodded slowly. Maybe it's about what we do now, how we move forward. Lily reached for his hand, her touch hesitant but genuine. I think we can try, she said. For Max. For us. It wasn't a grand resolution, but it was real. It was the beginning of something new, something built not on the broken promises of the past, but on the fragile hope of a better future. They both knew there would be challenges ahead, wounds that might never fully heal. But as they watched Max stack the colorful blocks, laughing as they tumbled down, there was a sense of possibility, one they hadn't allowed themselves to feel in a long time. Ethan pulled Lily closer, his voice a whisper filled with promise. We'll get through this, Lily. Together. And for the first time in years, he truly believed it.